I recently got a job as a night guard at a school in my town. When I saw the job offer online, I couldn't help but apply. I just moved out of the country and I needed some quick money. The paycheck was really good. $60 an hour, and being a college student in need of money, I didn't think much about it. I called the number posted on the website and a man with a low and raspy voice answered. Hello? Hi, this is Jack. I'm calling about the job advertisement, the night guard one. He paused for a second, then answered. Yeah, I'll fill you out with all the details when you get to the address. Meet me there tonight at 8 p.m. Okay, sure. That's how the conversation went. Jack didn't ask me any questions as to why I want to apply or what my skills are. It seemed like he just needed someone to take the post. Quick money, right? I thought. I ate a pizza for lunch and then got in my car and drove to the school. When I arrived, I saw a big SUV parked in front of the entrance. Inside, a man was in his 50s, wearing casual clothes and smoking a cigar. My gut feeling told me he was Jack, so I got out of the car and waved at him. He immediately noticed me and opened his rear window. Hey, are you the guy that called me about the job? Yeah, it's me. Good, I need to ask you a few questions before we proceed. Sure, go ahead, I replied. Can you defend yourself in case someone breaks in and threatens you? He asked in a fast-paced manner. Yeah, I can. He didn't let me finish my sentence. It looked like he was in a hurry. Fine. Do you get scared easily? Do I get scared easily? By what? I didn't want to annoy him, so I just said, no. Do you believe in God? Do I believe in God? This is getting weird, I thought. Maybe I should search for something else. But then I remembered the pay. So I just told Jack, yes, I do, sir. He waited a while before having any sort of reaction, like he was thinking about something. Fine, you're accepted. That's it, I thought to myself. No more questions, nothing. Well then. Jack looked straight at me, piercing me with his eyes. You should start working tonight. You have everything you need in the security office inside the school, including your uniform and some tools which might come in handy. Your shift starts at 10 p.m. You have any questions, call me. No one else. Understood? I quickly replied, yes. Then Jack gave me his phone number and drove off, leaving me to my duties. I went inside, and I could notice the classic interior the school had. It gave me a lot of 80s vibes from the look of it. Splendid, I thought. I walked across the long hallway, filled with classrooms on the left side, until I arrived at the security office. I grabbed the doorknob and rushed inside, as I didn't want to be unprepared for my shift. I checked the locker, and it had a uniform, a flashlight, and a wristwatch. I quickly grabbed all of them and put on the uniform and the watch. Then I stared at the desk. On it, there was a document which listed my duties as the night guard. Usual stuff. I quickly read through it, and I didn't notice anything interesting. On the back of the document, I saw a note. It was stained by coffee, but the letters were visible. It read, Rules for the night guard at the school. Rules? This is nonsense, I thought to myself. But, out of curiosity, I started reading. I got terrified by what was written on the piece of paper. This is the set of rules for the night guard of the school. By no means you are to break one of the rules, or your life will be in terrible danger. As the hours will pass, you will encounter different types of anomalies. Your shift starts at 10 p.m. and ends at 6 a.m. Be sure to arrive sooner than 10. The more time you have to prepare, the better. We have also provided you with a gun in case of emergency. It's located in the drawer. Be sure to grab it. Rule 1. Always make sure you are silent while outside the security office. The creatures inside are dormant as long as you don't make any noise above the sound of your footsteps. There are hours when they get active though, so pay attention to the next rules. Rule 2. Always make sure to lock the door behind you when you get in and out of the security office. Oh, and one more thing. After 2 a.m., the door to the security office will be compromised. Do not go inside, as it will prove to be a dead end. Rule 3. Constantly check the watch we provide to see the correct hour. Every other watch will be malfunctioning while inside. Rule 4. During 10 PM and 11 PM, start patrolling the school. Nothing will happen during this job if you follow the first rule, but you have to get inside your office before 11. The creatures mentioned before will start to be active, and you don't want to be out there with them. If you can't make it to the security office, hide in one of the bathrooms and pray they don't find you. Rule 5. Between 11 PM and 12 AM, you have to stay inside your office, but you need to pay attention to the surveillance cameras. You will see the creatures walking around the school looking for prey. If you see them come close to the security office, turn off all lights from the breaker box and barricade the door. If you don't see them getting near, just carry on with your business. Rule 6. Between 12 AM and 2 AM, you have to make a round to the school once again. Pay attention for blood on the floor. If you see blood, run back to the security office and barricade the door. Something will claw at the door, but it will leave soon if you don't make any noise. After it's gone, continue patrolling. Rule 7. During 2 AM and 4 AM, you need to check the basement. Once you get there, the door behind you will be closed until 4. If you hear low growling coming from multiple directions, hide wherever you can. If you cannot hide, be prepared to run to the panic room. The path leading to it is marked on the sticky note. Rule 8. Once you enter the basement, the janitor will start to follow you until the end of your shift. You will intermittently see glimpses of him. Do not let him catch you. If he gets too close, tap him on the shoulder and say, "Not now, my friend, not now." He will disappear for roughly half an hour, giving you time to gain distance. Notice, you can only do this once. Rule 9. After 4 AM, the creatures inside will start to hunt you. Do your best to evade them until 6 AM. If you can do that, they will return to being dormant again, and you can safely exit the building. Your shift is over. Rule 10. This one never happened to anybody, so that's why I left it to be last on this list. While you are inside, you could start to hear a storm outside. If that happens, look out the windows to see if it rains blood. If it does, you may encounter a pale woman with long dark hair named Max during your shift. Max will appear normal at first, but soon after, she will slowly transform into something horrible and start hunting you until the end of your shift. If that happens, get in the ventilation system and hide there, keeping quiet until the end of your shift. If Max crawls into the vent as well, evade her as well as you can. Your life is on the line. Don't worry about the janitor or the other creatures. They fear her as well. After your watch shows 6 AM, she will back away. You can end your shift and exit the school. Good luck. I hope we'll see you alive tomorrow. I could feel my blood run cold in my veins. What did I just read? Is this just a prank to scare the new guy? I started to panic though. What if the rules were real? Could I even survive a shift like this? After calming down for a minute, I thought that maybe I should take the note seriously, just in case something is really in here with me. By the time I was done preparing, the watch was showing 10:15 PM. Crap, I should get going. I started to walk across the long and dimly lit hallways, checking the classrooms and bathrooms, everything I could. I could feel the air around me getting heavier with each step, like something was watching me, carefully paying attention to every move I make, thirsty for human blood. I checked the watch and, for a moment, I froze. 10:55 PM. I don't think I have the time to get back to the security office without sprinting and making a lot of noise. I remembered the 4th rule. During 10 PM and 11 PM, start patrolling the school. Nothing will happen if I follow the 1st rule, but I have to get inside the office before 11. The creatures mentioned at the 1st rule will start to be active, and I don't want to be out there with them. If I can't make it to the security office, I have to hide inside the bathrooms and pray they don't find me. I just broke the rule, but I can still follow the last part. I went to one of the bathrooms and hid in a stall, locking the door behind me. Not long after, I heard painfully loud shrieks echoing through the hallways, so loud that I could feel the sound shattering my eardrums. I was horrified, and cold sweat started to drip down my neck. I had to calm myself down in order not to hyperventilate and attract unwanted attention. I opened my phone and saw that I had no service. What the hell, I thought. I should have had signal inside, as it was before I started my shift. Now, it's gone, and I was there, trapped with those things, all by myself. I didn't have much time to contemplate on the situation, as I heard something enter the bathroom. It started to crawl around, sniffing for prey. It came in front of my stall and started to scratch the door. Oh crap. I was close to passing out, since I got terrified thinking of what could have been on the other side of the door. I knew it sensed something, and it won't leave until it gets me. It started to growl at the door, and that's when I passed out. Then I woke up, and surprisingly, it seemed to have disappeared. I checked my watch, and it was showing 11:30 p.m. I had to make a run for the office. I slowly exited the stall, and then got out of the bathroom. The next thing I did was very stupid. I ran to the security office as fast as I could, and I drew a lot of attention towards me. Soon I was chased by something, and I started to run at full speed. I could feel it breathing at the back of my throat and smelled its putrid scent. I didn't want to turn my head around to see what it looked like. That didn't matter anymore. I quickly got to the security office, storming inside and locking the door behind me. I heard loud growls, banging and scratching at the door. I then barricaded the door and turned off all the lights in the building, just as the rule said. Maybe there was still some time to follow them and escape alive out of this hell pit. Soon after, the sound stopped. I quickly glanced at the security cameras and saw the creatures walking away from the office. They looked terrifying. All of them were black and had a sort of fur on top of their skin. Their eyes, oh my god, their eyes were white and translucent, and you could see the veins inside them. Their claws were sharp, and they left marks on the floor where they passed. All of them had a sort of twisted grin on their face, showing their teeth, with jagged edges, hungry for flesh. I kept watching them on the cameras, seeing them move across the hallways and classrooms, looking for prey, looking for me. I didn't have time to recover, because soon after, the watch was showing 12 a.m. I had to get moving. I grabbed the flashlight and walked into the dark abyss, afraid of what I'd just witnessed. I knew that my life was in terrible danger, and the only way to survive was to follow the rules written on the note. Chaotic thoughts were rushing through my head. I could see my entire life unfolding right in front of my eyes. I was terrified, because deep inside, I had a feeling that I won't get out of this situation alive. I continued the journey across the endless and dark hallways, checking all of the classrooms and bathrooms, along with the principal's office and the canteen. I was surprised by the fact that I couldn't see anything messed up while I was patrolling. It's like they vanished into thin air after the incident from earlier. But I still kept quiet, as I could feel something was wrong. I wasn't alone in there. Something was quietly observing each and every move I was making, waiting to find a moment when I'll be weak and tear at my flesh. As instructed, I was paying attention to the floor to see if there was any blood on it. Nothing. Lucky me, I thought. One less demonic thing to worry about. I checked the watch, and it was showing 1:30 a.m. In half an hour, I had to go check the basement, as it was written on the rule set. I slowly made my way near, arriving at the canteen. It was empty, and the thought of having a few moments of peace comforted my mind. I could feel my breath getting easier, and then a sudden sense of hope emerged deep inside me. I had to get out alive. I didn't have much time to think though, as the watch on my wrist showed 2 a.m. I had to go down in the basement. I approached the door slowly, and I grabbed the handle to open it. It was rusty, as though nobody had gone in there for years. As I opened the door, I shone my flashlight into the darkness and descended slowly into whatever place which was awaiting me. I grabbed the sticky note from the rule set and made sure to check the way to the panic room. I'd better be safe than sorry, I thought. As I was walking around the dark abyss, I quickly noticed that someone was following me. After taking a better look, my heart started to beat fast, and I could feel the sense of dread in the air. My legs froze as I could distinguish his appearance. The janitor. I almost forgot about the rule. Once you enter the basement, the janitor will start to follow you until the end of your shift. You will intermittently see glimpses of him. Do not let him catch you. If he gets too close, tap him on the shoulder and say, "Not now, my friend, not now." He will disappear for roughly half an hour, giving you time to gain distance. I pulled myself out of the trance I was in and ran. I didn't know where I was heading, and it honestly didn't matter at that point. The janitor continued to follow me in a fast pace. Just when I thought that things couldn't get worse, I started to hear low growling. It was coming from every direction, and it got louder as each second passed. I could feel the air around me getting cold and filled with a foul smell of rotting corpses. I booked it to the panic room, running as fast as I could. As I wasn't paying enough attention to my surroundings, I tripped on something and my flashlight fell from my right hand. My primal survival instinct kicked in, and I continued to run as I left the flashlight there on the ground. I didn't even realize that I was close to the panic room until I hit my head on the door. Then, in complete darkness, I frantically tried to find the handle to get inside, and I could hear something big crawling towards me. As it was getting closer and closer, I finally got inside the panic room and shut the door behind me. Soon after, something was smashing its body on it, trying to get inside. I could hear terrible sounds coming from outside. I don't even know how to describe them other than demonic. It kept going for a while, and then it suddenly stopped. I sighed in relief. I got my phone out and turned on the flashlight. As I looked around the room, I froze. I forgot all about the janitor. I felt a breath in my neck and tried to remember the rule. That's it, I thought. I leaned over and touched him on the shoulder while saying, "Not now, my friend, not now." He let out a loud scream and vanished. I didn't have time to rest, as I checked my watch again and it showed 3:50 a.m. No more than 10 minutes, and all of the demonic creatures lurking around the school will start to hunt me. I still had the gun from the drawer in the security room, and that gave me a little sense of safety. If I could stay alive for the last 2 hours, I will get out of this hell. I could sit inside the panic room until my shift ends, I thought. Suddenly, I heard the faint sound of rain coming from outside. This can't be. No, it's impossible. I'm just imagining things. My mind was aggressively trying to suppress my fear, but deep down, I knew I had to go upstairs and look outside the windows. I got out of the shelter I had inside the panic room and made my way upstairs. As I got out of the basement, I could see the terrifying creatures running around as if they were trying to find a place to hide from something. As I looked outside one of the windows, I could feel a spine-chilling sensation, freezing in place with fear. It was raining blood, and I knew what that meant. It was written in the rules. If I see blood, that means I may encounter a pale woman with long dark hair, named Max. Max will appear normal at first, but soon after, she will slowly transform into something horrible and start hunting me until the end of my shift. Damn, I'm done for. I tried to make it back to the panic room of the basement, thinking that Max won't find me there. As I was slowly walking back to the entrance of the lower level, a pale woman with long, dark hair appeared right in front of me. I had to get inside the vents before she transformed into whatever bloody thing she will. As I ran into one of the classrooms that entered the ventilation system, I heard bones cracking and loud, high-pitched shrieks coming from behind. I didn't dare look at the thing. I quickly got inside the vent and started to crawl, looking for a place to hide. I could hear Max crawling after me, following me, as if she knew where I was headed. Desperately searching for a hideout, I went inside a tube located on the side of the main crawl space and hid there. Then I could hear Max getting closer, her claws scraping the insides of the crawl space. She passed right beside me, and I could get a glimpse of what she looked like. Her limbs are long, with bones protruding from them, and big, sharp claws. Her head is deformed, and her teeth elongated and pointed, like razors coming out of her mouth. Max rushed through the ventilation system, looking for me, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she finds me. I'm trapped inside the narrow crawl space, having nowhere to go. As I'm writing this, I can hear her shrieks and the sounds of her claws scraping the metallic inside of the vents. And she's getting close. I can feel.
Once a year, my parents go on a vacation together somewhere in the US, usually to the Bahamas or to Florida. They leave me in charge of the house with my dog and like for me to check on my Nana, who lives in our basement. My dad likes to take part in this weird golfing competition with his friends, where if someone wins a certain amount of holes, they get to take home this creepy doll as sort of a trophy. I don't get why, but I guess it's just some running gag. Well, my dad won the competition and he brought it home before he left. I'm not at all scared of dolls. In fact, before he left, I slept with it beside me as a joke. It was basically an old baby doll with a missing eye and a brown dress. I don't know the origin of it and didn't really bother to ask. November rolls around and my parents leave for their vacation. Everything goes normal for a while, but then things start to get weird. Because I'm the stereotypical little brother, I put the doll on my sister's bed, who's in university, and took a picture to send her as a joke. She hates dolls. So I leave the room with the doll still in there and head to my room just to send the photo and move on with my life. A few minutes later, I hear a massive bang. I jump, startled, and go to look out into the hallway. My sister's bedroom door has slammed shut. Now, our hallway has no opening windows, and there wasn't any sort of draft. Even if there was, that bang sounded forceful. A little on edge, I open her door and see that the doll has fallen face forward, even though I left it sitting upright. I thought it was weird, but brought the doll back into my room and moved on. That night, I'm sleeping normally in my parents' bedroom. I have to sleep in there while my parents are away because I need to keep an eye on my dog, and she refuses to sleep anywhere else. I wake up suddenly in the night, which is odd. I usually sleep all the way through the night. I check the time and see that it's around 3 a.m. This immediately scares me because I read that it's the witching hour. I glanced over at my dog, and she was awake too with her head up. Also strange. I put on my little puppy voice and ask my dog if she needs to pee, but she just stares back at me, then looks to the closet. I look to the closet too, and see that it's open even though I remember shutting it before going to bed. I quickly turn the lamp on and get out of bed to close the door. I don't even bother looking inside. My teenage brain still thinks a ghost is more likely than an intruder. So I get back into bed, scroll on my phone a bit, until I fall back to sleep. I wake up the next morning as usual to feed my dog, but when I go out into the hall, I see my bedroom door is open. I always close my door when I'm not in there. Now, it was still dark out because I have to feed my dog around 6 a.m. or she throws a fit. I look inside my room, turn on the light, and the doll is on the floor. I left it on my bed. I remembered last night and am now feeling paranoid, but again, I just put the doll back on my bed and leave, deciding just to have my door open. After feeding my dog, I went back to bed to sleep a couple extra hours. That's when the most frightening thing happened. I was woken up by a loud banging sound, loud enough to wake me up, the heaviest sleeper in my family. I quickly got up and ran downstairs, my first thought being maybe my Nana had fallen in the basement and was banging for me to help her, but when I got downstairs I realized that the banging was coming from my balcony door. I saw the glass shaking, as if something was hitting it from outside. The banging was so loud that it was shaking the counters. The strangest part is that my dog was just standing in front of the door staring at it, and she's the type of dog who will start barking if a mouse farts. I'm really shaken up at this point. It's completely still outside, no wind at all. I text my parents and tell them what's going on. As soon as I do, the banging stops. They tell me it's probably nothing to worry about. I went downstairs to see my Nana, but she had no idea what happened. She's also completely deaf, so of course she couldn't hear it. She can't even walk up the stairs, so there's no way she caused any of it. That was the last weird incident that happened. The next week, my parents got back. I didn't tell them everything that happened because I didn't want them to think I'm a chicken or something. Needless to say, I moved the doll out of my room until my dad brought it back to his golf team. Nothing else strange occurred. I still have no idea what went on during those couple of days. I sort of wonder about the story behind that doll now, but I don't really know if I want to ask my dad. I want to preface this by saying that I generally consider myself to be a rather skeptical person, and have written off most of cryptozoology and paranormal stuff as straight up bunk until this event. I try to see if there's a realistic reasoning behind most encounters and stories, if that makes sense. Now, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this story. It was the late summer of 2005 in Northeast Ohio. I was heading into my junior year of high school. I was spending the night over at my best friend's house, and we decided for the hell of it to just go crash outside for the night, with just sleeping bags. It was a peaceful enough evening. The weather was nice, balmy, kind of warm, and the air rang with the pleasant symphony of crickets and far-off spring peepers. Skies couldn't have been more clear, as it was that special sort of feeling in the air where you were far enough away from the last time it rained that the air didn't feel heavy anymore, and actually felt inviting instead of humid and miserable. This was as close to a picturesque summer evening as you could get. Everything was blanketed in the dark blue elegance of the evening light. Falling asleep was easy enough. This was a year that mosquitoes were remarkably in pretty low numbers, making sleeping unprotected with just a sleeping bag simple for once. Eventually, as bad luck would have it, I had to answer the call of nature, so I was roused from sleep to do so. My buddy's yard was a fairly large-sized one with an area of woods bordering most of it. After finishing, I staggered back over to my sleeping bag and noticed that my friend was not in his. We were staged a few feet apart in case a bear came and got someone in the middle of the night or something. It would leave enough time for the other one to run to safety. You know, bro stuff. In any case, I catch him in my peripheral vision just kind of standing along the side of a shed that was in his yard. I wasn't kidding when I said that this night was picturesque. The sky was so unnaturally clear that the starlight and what little of the crescent moon we had left led to quite a bit of light despite being in the dead of the night itself. However, the area where we chose to pee, with the shed included, happened to be nestled along the part of the yard that was the thickest with trees, leading to a large portion of the yard still being under heavy shadow. Kind of funny to think about, isn't it? Having a well-defined area of shade in the dead of night when you expect everything to be dark. Oh, have I mentioned that at this point it was also suspiciously quiet? The idyllic chirping of the frogs and crickets that had earlier ushered me to sleep was now nowhere to be heard. I hadn't realized it when I first woke up to do my business, but it was quiet the whole time since I had woken up. Honestly, the fact that it was so quiet may have been why I woke up in the first place, on top of answering nature's call. Focusing my attention back on my friend, I'm noticing that he's still standing by the shed. He was around the corner away from me, so I had to approach him from behind, and thankfully it seemed he was going to be done using the bathroom. And thankfully it seemed he was done going to the bathroom as his pants were up. "Hey, what are you doing just standing around there?" I ask as I circle around and approach to his left. I didn't even need to wait for an answer before I immediately saw what had him frozen. Roughly about 30 feet away, hidden among the thickest area of forest in the yard, way back behind the shed, it stood. I'm not the greatest with words, so please bear with me as I try my best to describe what befell my eyes. This creature was perhaps a few inches taller than myself, and I was 6 foot at the time. However, that's where the similarities end. It stood on 2 legs with a hunched posture, as it appeared to have had its shoulders raised up with its head leaning slightly forward. It had arms, but the forearms were a bit longer than the upper arms, culminating into sickly-looking hands ending in long points, almost like claws. Though bathed in starlight and shadow, I could discern the skin of the beast was about a dark blue, dark grayish color. The head itself was mostly obscured by the shadows, but retained a general humanoid appearance. I couldn't make out a mouth or a jaw, but the most unnerving thing about it was that its eyes glowed red. Well, perhaps glowed is a bit of a sensationalist term. It actually looked more like the red eye effect from old photos. However, it definitely illuminated the area immediately around the eye sockets. So perhaps illuminate is the better term. This creature was so sickeningly frail and thin in build that there was no way it could have been a neighbor fucking with us, as it didn't even seem physically possible for something so thin to even be able to support weight on such a frame. And then it started moving. At this point, my fight-or-flight response told me to go screw myself, and I stood frozen in fear, just like my friend. The beast, already a horrific bastardization of the human form, now grotesquely bobbed its body up and down, as if attempting to take off in flight. I didn't notice it before, but there appeared to be a sort of cape behind its back. Though I say cape, it appeared to be of a ragged, fleshy texture, as if the skin on its back was flayed off and was dragging behind its arms. This sickening flesh cape waved with each flap of its arms, giving the illusion of wings. But that wasn't even the worst part. It emitted a noise. This wasn't a growl or a roar or even a scream. The sound it made was akin to a raspy inhale, like someone deeply out of breath. However, it still wasn't quite like that. There was like a sort of reverb to its breathing. It echoed quietly, yet still managed to be one of those sounds that you feel in your bones, each graveling breath raking its claws into your very soul as you're already frozen in horror. This dance felt like it went on for hours, but in reality it was only a few brief moments that passed. Our bodies finally made enough adrenaline that we were able to bolt and sprint to his house. We talked about it a few days later, but after a point just didn't feel like reliving it anymore. Until we researched what cryptids were and settled on the idea we came across, and decided that people would think we were just full of it, and decided to not bother talking about it at all. To this day, I still don't know what I encountered, but this experience has subconsciously kept me terrified of being in wooded areas after dark for all these years. In fact, last weekend my wife and kids and I were camping at a state campground, and it was the first time I had been outside at night in the woods since that day, and I was scared all night long. Thankfully, nothing happened, and we had a nice weekend. But it's crazy that this experience has affected me for so long. My wife was the only other person I shared this experience with, and at first she laughed it off, thinking I was kidding, until she saw how solemn that I got when I talked about it, and could see that it clearly was not a joke to me. She then confided in me that she's experienced her own paranormal things, so that's fun too. Superficially, I would say it resembled what people have described as the Mothman, but I never actually saw it take flight, and the eyes didn't glow nearly as bright as reports made it out to be. Also, the wings only looked like wings when it was flapping its arms, and I doubt that it could have actually flown with those raggedy skin flaps. But I'm definitely not going to be trying to figure it out. The only other guess was some kind of crawler, maybe, but I never saw it make any other action aside from the bobbing and arm waving. I swear up and down that this story, as much as it sounds like it's a made-up, run-of-the-mill scary doll story, it is 100% true and still terrifies me. When I was a kid, I would spend a lot of time in Texas with my brother and stepmom, mainly just my brother and stepmom because my dad was in the military, and would frequently go on long trips, leaving us alone in whatever house that we happened to be living at the time. When I was about 5, we moved to a very large, old Victorian house. It had 3 stories, not including the attic and the basement, lots of rooms, and as a little kid I found it was very fun to explore. In the attic, there was a ton of old junk that the owner of the house was storing while we were renting it, including a huge collection of beautiful, handcrafted porcelain dolls. There were hundreds of them lined up neatly on the back wall in a glass case, standing on their little stands like an army ready for command, and as a little girl who loved ribbons and bows and anything girly, I was entranced. One doll in particular stood out to me. It had beautiful red hair. It was a green-eyed doll in a blue silk dress with a matching ribbon. I begged my dad to let me play with her. I felt like I needed to hold and love her and have tea parties with her. He of course refused, saying that the dolls were worth more than I could imagine and that he wanted his deposit back when we moved. He kept the door locked for good measure after catching me more than once staring in awe at the doll. A month went by and I had all but forgotten about her, choosing to simply explore the house and play in my basement room with my Barbies. That is until one day when I came home from dropping my dad off at the base and found the red-haired doll sitting on my bed. I was ecstatic, thinking that my dad had given me the doll and left it as a surprise, so I proceeded to play with the doll every second of every day until my dad came home. As soon as my dad saw the doll, he flipped out and yelled at me, spanked me, and took the doll away to lock back up in the basement, and only got more aggravated when he discovered that the attic door was still locked, and he was the only one to have the key. He couldn't figure out how I could have possibly picked the lock and repicked the lock to lock it back. His solution was that I had somehow convinced my brother to do it for me. Another month went by and my dad installed another lock on the attic, warning me and my brother what would happen if he found out that we had been in there again while he was gone. That very night, when we returned home, the doll sat on my bed again, leaving me wary of its presence. Something that had once made me so happy now made me cautious and anxious. I told my stepmom, who immediately became angry and slapped me and then my brother, and tried to return the doll, only to find the attic door, once again, locked. She tore the house apart trying to find the keys that she was positive we had hidden until giving up and locking the doll in her room. The night my dad came home, I was terrified. He wouldn't speak to me or my brother at all. He only gave a short speech about how we needed to go to our rooms and not come out. The next trip he made, we didn't see him off to the base. We sat in our rooms and had a quiet evening alone. I spent the night sulking and trying to figure out how the doll had gotten back into my room. Later, after I had fallen asleep, I heard soft music box sounds that slowly woke me up. I felt something near my feet, and thinking it was my cat curled up, I reached down, only to find, instead of fur, a handful of hair. I turned on my light and screamed. What looked like every doll from the attic was in my room. They were sitting at my tea table on my dollhouse and positioned in standing position on my bed and in various parts of my room. My door slammed open, and my dad appeared in the doorway where he had apparently been waiting for me to head to the attic to claim a doll. He took one look at them, grabbed me, and ran out of the house, dragging my brother and stepmom along with us. He refuses to speak of them to this day. The most important part of the story is the backstory of the red-haired doll. Apparently, the original builder and owner of the house had a daughter who died when she was about 8, and it was customary to make a doll of their likeness made out of their real hair and dressed in the same clothes that the child had worn. I think it was that little girl, because I have never felt like it was dangerous to play with the doll. I just felt like she was lonely and wanted to make a friend. It's been 4 or 5 years since my last encounter. I think I'm safe, right? Wrong. I moved last year and I recently thought, hey, remember those kids a few years ago? Funny, they can't get you now. Boy, was I ever incorrect. I live on a mountain, and like an hour away from the beach in a super populated neighborhood with my roommates. 2 chill lesbians and a college dude. Super cool people. I think nothing can hurt me now, because there are people everywhere. But no, I'm stupid and jinx myself. I was home 2 days ago. Class was canceled, and the dude of the house was home too and taking a nap. I'm in the kitchen watching Netflix and doing homework when there's a knock on the window. Obviously, this is weird as hell, but I have weird as hell friends. Maybe one of them are trying to scare me. I brush it off and continue what I was doing, and then it happens again. Once again, I brush it off because maybe it was the snow if it wasn't one of my friends. Things like this happen all the time with them. Well, it goes on for about 10 minutes, and I'm kinda starting to freak out. My friends don't have this much patience. I go to Charlie's room, the guy, and wake him up. I'm not the one that's usually riled up, so he's concerned too. We both go to the window. I have my phone out with the camera and 911 within a touch, and Charlie has a bat. We look out the window, and no one is there. After a minute, we calm down and go and sit in the living room. Charlie's mom is a cop, so he says he'll tell her about it later. We think we're okay, so we chill and watch TV together. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rings. I go and open the door. At first, I don't see anything. Then, down on the bottom of the stairs of the apartment, I see 3 young boys dressed in black hoodies, jeans, with brown or black bangs. At first I didn't move, I was frozen in place. Then Charlie asked who it was, and I came to my senses and got a good look at the kids, then slammed the door shut behind me. I started bawling, and I mean sobbing. I had no clue what to do. Charlie's freaking out because I don't cry, especially in front of people like that. He ran to the door with the bat that we have on the windowsill and looked outside. He saw them too. He started freaking out because he didn't know what to do, so he started yelling at them to leave. He said they started smiling. I was crying even more now, and he was still screaming, and I think the neighbors wanted to call the cops. Now think about this. He didn't know what they were. He thought they were normal kids that had scared me. He didn't see their eyes yet. I started yelling at him to go inside when I hear a bunch of footsteps running up the stairs and Charlie screams and runs in. He's telling me he saw their eyes and that they were black, and now we're both freaking out and grabbing kitchen knives. Eventually we calm down and look outside again. No one's there, but we can see a group of kids past the complex with 3 that we think might have been the BEKs. I told him about the other thing that happened to me, and now we're scared to be in this house. We told the other roommates, and they thought we were high or something, so once again, no one believes me. This happened about 3 days ago, and I've been on edge ever since. I believe in the paranormal, but I'm skeptical about most of the stories that people tell. It's extremely hard to distinguish between a fabricated story and a true story when you can't see facial expressions or hear changes in a person's voice. About a week ago, I was sitting in my kitchen browsing the web, probably Reddit, on my phone. My kids had been asleep for about an hour, and my wife was in our room finishing up a paper for work. There wasn't a radio or television on. While browsing in complete silence, I heard my wife cough several times. The cough sounded as if she had breathed in some water and was trying to get it out of her lungs. Jokingly, I jumped out of my chair and ran over to the room where she was sitting. I started patting her back and pulling her earlobes down, again in a joking manner. She looked at me like, "What the hell?" So I told her I was trying to help since she had coughed so hard. She, still with the what the hell face, looked at me and said that she hadn't coughed. I stood there and evaluated what I may have heard. I thought it might have been one of my kids, but the cough was from a woman. It wasn't a 4-year-old or 1-year-old girl's cough. Other things about this cough is that it came from inside the house. It was the type of hack like after water goes down the wrong pipe. It was one succession of coughs, about 4 of them together. How did the coughing not continue if the coughs were heard that hard at the beginning? It didn't and still does not make sense. But that's not the only thing that happened. Fast forward to the next morning. My kids are awake and eating in the kitchen. I'm in the living room watching TV, still waking and drinking coffee, and my wife is in our room getting ready for the day. All electronics are off except the TV and our phones. My wife's phone rings from what sounds like the kitchen area. She runs to the kitchen to answer it because she was expecting an important phone call from work. She searches for her phone in the kitchen, but does not find it. She asks if it was my phone that rang, but I told her no. My phone was in my pocket. Turns out both my wife's work phone and personal phone are in our room on the other side of the house. We checked the kitchen and surrounding rooms for anything that could have made the ring, but we found nothing. I don't know the name of the ringtone, but it's a very common ringtone for iPhones. My wife and I searched for the reasoning of why we clearly heard a phone ring in the kitchen, but no matter how hard we tried, we were unable to find a logical explanation. I was going to write it off as just another weird coincidence, but I kept thinking of how clear the phone ringing was, and how my wife had heard it too. Add this one to the cough that I heard the night before, and I start to worry that there may be an intruder in my attic. I think, nah, not possible. But I have 2 little girls and a little boy too. It's a slim chance, but I'd feel better if I just went up there and checked. I texted my wife to watch the kids because I was worried that there might be an intruder. I didn't want to verbalize it because if they were up there, then they would hear me. I check outside and around the house first for any signs of a person being on the roof or anything like that. I look for cuts in the wall and see no signs of intrusion whatsoever. I then grab the ladder to get inside the attic. The only way into this attic is through a small 2x4 foot opening at the top of the interior of a closet in one of the rooms. I grab my flashlight and my gun, set the ladder up, and plan on entering the attic as quickly and tactfully as possible. I don't want the intruder to be lying in wait. I push the drywall that blocks the opening and can hear a door swing and shut. I say swing because it sounded like a door that was on a hinge or hinges. I can't get the drywall off, and the element of surprise is now gone. I push through anyway and inspect the attic. The attic has no floorboards. You have to navigate through it by standing on the supporting beams. It's extremely annoying to have to go up there to do housework. I find no signs of anyone being up there, no entry points, and again, no cuts in any of the walls. I come down and double check that my wife and kids had stayed in the living room like I had asked in case there was an intruder. She confirms that they were, and that no door had been shut. I pretty much already knew that the door shutting wasn't them because the sound came from the attic, but there's no door in the attic. I went through a checklist of explanations to the cough, the phone ring, and the door shutting, and again, have yet to encounter a single one that makes sense. I know it sounds weird, but a freaking portal is what I'm coming up with. I lived in this house for years, and have always heard weird noises, but never something like this. Most portal stories I've heard sound totally far-fetched. Usually a portal story includes a demon, or something spiritual, but this was just totally random. People crossing dimensions to hang out in my attic? There's no malice, no sightings, no physical evidence, but the sounds were definitely heard and are inexplicable. Something else happened a few nights ago. It was around 11 p.m. I'm asleep in bed and am woken up to my wife shaking me. She tells me that she heard a door close. I say to her that it may be our 4-year-old, but she says she was watching the monitor and the cameras were on the kids. She said that she had been watching the monitor because she had been hearing weird noises. I say maybe it's just the house creaking. She claims that she heard the windows shake. Now this is significant to me because we do have some old windows. The difference between the old and new windows is that the old windows will rattle when a door is shut due to air pressure or when the house is shaking, earthquakes, and the new windows won't. So she heard a door close and the windows shake. That's enough for me to grab my gun and check for an intruder yet again. I do an interior and exterior check and of course find nothing. I go back to bed and once again conclude that there is a portal in my house. A few years back, I had gone out with some friends to the mountains for a camping trip. And by camping trip, I mean everybody gets drunk or high around a fire in the middle of the woods and then passes out in their trucks. I was always the youngest of the friend group, and this took place before I found my taste for mind-altering substances. I'm typically something of a skeptic, and if this had happened nowadays, I'd probably blame it on being drunk. But I was stone cold sober the whole time, which is why I feel so sure of what I saw. We're all out at the campsite, maybe 10 or 15 of us. I'm sitting on someone's tailgate smoking a cigarette when my friend, let's call him John, comes up to me clearly intoxicated. John was the one who I came out to the campsite with, and probably my closest friend out of anyone there. He asked me if I wanted to go on an adventure with him in the woods. I figured that if nothing else, I should probably go with him just to make sure that he didn't drunkenly fall over and hurt himself. Not to mention that even though I didn't drink or do any drugs back then, didn't mean that I was opposed to fun adventures into the forest. So we walked past the tree line that surrounded the campfire and into the dense trees. The moon was out, and it was a pretty clear night, so although it wasn't dark, it wasn't pitch black. We came to a clearing that seemed to be made of flattish boulders and rocks. We were looking up at the night sky, and John was drunk talking, and I was listening and nodding along with whatever nonsense he was saying. He took a seat on one of the flatter rocks, and eventually just laid down and passed out. I tried to jostle him awake, but he just kept mumbling for me to let him rest a while. Since this is usually how John behaves when he's drinking, I complied, and figured I'd head back to the campsite and check on him again in a little bit. I go back, talk to a few people, smoke a few cigarettes, and then decide to go and check on him. Maybe 10 minutes have passed. I'm walking back to the clearing where I left him, and already from afar noticed that he wasn't in the same spot. I kept going, figuring that he must have gotten up and wandered off somewhere. As I'm walking, I notice a shadow in the shape of a human standing behind a shrub of sorts a few feet to my right. I stop, figuring that it was John messing with me. I said, "Dude, come on, let's go back to the camp." No response. Then I gave him the stereotypical, "Please, you're not scaring me." Still nothing. I moved closer to the shadow and noticed that I couldn't make out any distinguishable features. No shirt logo, no eyes, or any face for that matter. Just a vacuum of black that stood in the shape of a man, hanging out with me in the forest. I backed away, putting it all together that it wasn't John, and I ran back to camp. I checked the truck that John and I drove out there in, and he was sleeping on the bench seat. I did a quick head count, and everyone that I had recalled being at the camp was still there. The only thing that convinces me that this was paranormal was just the sheer absence of light that this thing took the shape of. Just pure darkness. Whenever I tell this story, John always gets chills, imagining that this thing was probably out there with him when he was passed out alone. The general conclusion was that John had stumbled back while I had left him, and I just didn't notice that he had returned. Like I said, I'm a skeptic, so I always try to rationalize these things. But this is the one experience that I've had that I just can't believe was simply my eyes playing tricks on me. I've heard of shadow people, but I always thought those were just what people saw during sleep paralysis. Not out in the wilderness, and not while fully awake. As an 8-year-old child, I was given a porcelain doll by a very dear family friend, Miss Marion. She was all the time coming across things and giving them to me. This doll was the last thing she gave me. I was never really into dolls at all growing up, but I took the doll and placed her in my room in a small, child-sized rocking chair. The chair sat right next to my closet and dresser beside my nightlight. The doll was very pretty. She was dressed in a peach and cream colored dress with an apron and petticoats. She had little black Mary Jane shoes that, when removed, showed her delicately painted toenails. Her body was soft, only her head, forearms, and legs from the knee down were porcelain. Her lips were pink, and her dark brown hair hung in slightly frizzed and now loose curls. Her eyes were brown, her cheeks a rosy peach color, all like mine. Miss Marion had a point of saying that the doll reminded her of me, which is why she gave her to me. From the moment that doll came into my house, things began to happen. I was always uneasy with Claire. I never wanted to touch her, and when I played in my room, it felt as if she were watching me. It wasn't anything to panic about, but I do remember feeling like if I did something wrong, she might actually tell on me. How ridiculous does that sound? The first real occurrence I remember was when I was reading in my room. Ghost stories, if you can believe that. When a musical carousel horse that sat on my dresser began to play. Not just a couple of notes, like old mechanical music boxes will do at times, but like someone just wound it up fully. I sat stunned and stared at the little horse as it moved up and down in time with the music, and then it just stopped. Not wound down, just suddenly stopped. I was a pretty brave kid. I didn't run, and I didn't tell my mom. I just let it go. The next thing that happened was the voice. For several nights, and on into these years, I was woken up by what sounded like a woman inches from my face shouting my name. I would jump and sit up and find my room empty. Those happenings died down after a few months. She then started to plague my little brother with the same thing, and now that he and I are grown and gone, she's moved on to my dad. The little things started to get to me. I'd put something in a certain place only to find it later on the floor or on my dresser, right next to Claire. All my missing items eventually turned up around her. Once a ring ended up in the pocket of her apron. Books would fall off of my shelves, and a perfume smell would sometimes fill my room. The doll itself didn't smell at all, but the air around her would. My catalyst to finally get Claire out of my room was the night I woke up after hearing thumping around near my closet. I opened my eyes, sat up in bed, and of course my eyes were drawn to the nightlight where Claire sat. As I watched, the source of the thumping became clear. The rocking chair Claire occupied was rocking on its own. I had thick shag carpet, so there's no way it was rocking just by chance. If that wasn't enough, Claire's feet, which were both turned to the side facing opposite each other, slowly straightened themselves to be both pointing directly up. This part still freaks me out 20 years later. She then turned her head, which was quite impossible to do since it was attached, fixed to her cloth body. She looked toward me, and every music box in my room, 4 of them, started to play at once. I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't feel endangered so much as I just felt scared of what was happening. I screamed for my mom and dad. The music stopped, but Claire maintained her gaze in my direction. And this is why I hate dolls. Even after that, I couldn't get rid of Claire totally. I ended up stuffing her in a box in the back of a storage closet. She's still there as far as I know. So is the woman who now screams my dad's name in the middle of the night, and not in the kinky way. While I think she explains some of the oddities that happened in my parents' house, I don't think she's the tie to it all. I totally forgot about this happening until my mom brought it up at dinner tonight, and now it's 9:30 at night and I'm scared all over again. This was back in high school, either my freshman or sophomore year. I missed the bus, and I didn't have a car at the time, so my mom had to drive me to school. The road my tiny neighborhood, more like a glorified cul-de-sac, was off of was a long stretch that had only one equally tiny other neighborhood and a few houses here and there. It was 6 a.m. or something and still dark outside, and it was colder than a witch's tit. As we were pulling out of the neighborhood, my mom and I both saw these 3 children in blue and white private school uniforms standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder at the entrance of the neighborhood on the sidewalk. It was either 2 girls and 1 boy or 2 boys and 1 girl. I didn't remember the ratio, but the girls wore a blue and white skirt/dress outfit, and the boy wore a blue short-sleeved shirt with khaki shorts. This was weird for a few reasons. One, it was 40 degrees outside. They looked like they were dressed for the summer, and they didn't even wear coats or anything. Secondly, there were 2 schools in the area, but not a private school till the next town over, and the blue and white weren't the school's uniform colors. Third, what young kids just stand there in a single file line not doing anything but staring? No joshing around, no nothing? Yeah, right. Lastly, this wasn't where the bus stop was. It was a few blocks down. Just a sprinkle of extra creepy on top. There weren't any streetlights. They were just standing there in the dark, not doing jack except for being creepy as hell. They were on the corner on the right, closest to the passenger side where I was obviously sitting. And of course, we were turning right. As we got closer, I thought that at first they didn't have faces, but it was just too shadowy and dark out, and the headlights only shone under their shoulders, which is how I can remember the outfits so vividly. Then we got closer, and I was relieved to see that they did have faces, but then got completely freaked all over again when I saw that their eyes were all black. Like supernatural Sam and Dean fighting demons, all black. My mom saw it before I did, and she put the pedal to the metal and hightailed it out of there. I remember trying to look back and see them, but I couldn't since it was too dark. My mom didn't go back home until the sun rose, and it was bright enough to not be afraid anymore. Of course, no one believed me at school, and my siblings thought we were just full of it, but we know what we saw. We never saw them again after that, though. I thought that they were spirits. But after a few months, I heard about the black-eyed children on YouTube, or something that made the connection. We moved shortly after that due to unrelated reasons. This was 3 or 4 years ago, and I had blissfully forgotten all about it until my mom said, "Hey, remember when?" And now I want to die. I hope that my irrational anxieties and fear around children that are small enough for me to punt across a soccer field is amusing at least. A few days ago, I started writing a script for a horror film. I was thinking about my experiences as a kid and what frightened me. The scariest thing that I remember is the first thing that came to mind, and also the most recent one that I can recall. When I was 7 or 8, in the middle of summer, I woke up in the middle of the night. I thought it was because I was cold, which was uncomfortably odd because it was summer, and my bedroom is upstairs and insulated. I moved my curtain aside to see if the window was open, but it was closed tight. While I was looking at the window, I noticed a man standing in the street. The street lamp was on his back, so I couldn't see his face, but he was looking toward our house. What I noticed was that he was very tall. I think now that he was probably around 6'7". It scared the crap out of me, so I pulled the curtain over the window and used the tacks from one of my posters to tack the curtain down, since the window didn't lock. I covered my head with my covers, because I knew that my dad would say it was a nightmare and give me a hug before sending me back to bed. I eventually did fall back asleep, but a few hours later, I woke up again. It was still very dark out, probably around 1 a.m. The first thing I noticed was my bedroom door was open, and I always shut my bedroom door because I'm a very private person. I got out of bed and went to go to the bathroom. I made sure as I was leaving the bathroom to close my door. Once I was done, as I was going up the stairs, I noticed that my door was open. At this point, I was pretty freaked out. I went into my room, and my heart dropped into my stomach. My bedspread was torn from my bed. The sheets were strewn across the floor. All my pictures and posters were taken off the walls, and the dresser was emptied onto my bed. I went into my sister's room because it was right across the hall. I felt even worse when I did this because she was fast asleep and all the papers had been pulled out of her desk. I woke her up, shaking her as hard as I could. I told her what had happened, and we both ran downstairs to my dad's room. He helped us search the house, but we didn't find anything. Nothing had been taken, and my sister and I's rooms were the only ones that had been trashed. We both slept in the living room for a few days, because it was by my dad's room, but nothing happened, so we went back to life as normal, and eventually forgot about it, until now. I would like to preface by saying that I am a Roman Catholic who has experienced paranormal phenomena since I was 5. My late grandmother had experienced similar phenomena, and my mother and sisters also, but to a much lesser degree. As I get older, I notice the experiences are slightly more darker in nature. I know very little of demonology, other than what has been referenced in the Bible. I try to stay away from anything referencing demons, the devil, etc., which is why this experience was so difficult and I was not prepared. In October of 2018, I was admitted to the hospital due to an electrolyte imbalance. I was in a room with 3 other female patients. On my second night, my arms were finally free of the IV, so I was able to move around and assist the other women, who weren't as mobile, in getting ready for bed. One of the women was much older and cranky. She seemed to take an instant dislike to me when I first moved into the room, but warmed up to me after I helped her. When the lights went out, I decided to lay on my stomach and say my silent prayers. To the casual observer, it would have looked as if I was asleep. During this time, I could hear the woman that I helped argue with herself about me. She stated that I was nice, and then she replied to herself stating that I am not what I seem or something to that effect, and it went back and forth like that during my prayers. Shortly after, the room started getting really cold, really fast. I silently prayed to God to watch over her and free her from any negative influences. It was then that I heard her say these words very loudly. I don't know the Lord's Prayer, and my name. I freaked out, quickly processing what had just happened. The woman knew that I was praying over her, and there was no way that she could have known that. In my mind, I instinctively knew that I was not up for the confrontation. I was weak, and still recovering. I got up from my bed, and with my back to her, I said something like, "There's no way I can stay here now." To which she answered, "Yes, go." I won, and laughed really hard. I was amazed that the other 2 women had slept through it. It was around 10 p.m. when this occurred. The room was stiflingly cold at this point, and I ran to reception and asked to be discharged, but the charge nurse said that I couldn't leave without my doctor discharging me. I begged again to be discharged, but was denied, and the nurses tried to call me as they got a hold of my doctor, who said that he would be in at 7 a.m. and that I needed to stay put. I asked to be relocated to another room in the interim, but the only available room was directly next door, and that was way too close for my liking, so they put me in the day room with a blanket and pillow. I used my phone to call my sister to get me out of the hospital. She works at another hospital, and told me the car wasn't home and to catch an Uber to her place. The ward was locked down for the evening though, so I couldn't leave anyway, and chose to just stay in the day room. The TV was on standby, but I could hear voices coming from it, even though the screen was blank. The voices talked about a shooting at the hospital I was in, with thousands of fatalities. It then talked about my baby nephew being in a plane that was shot down. By then, I was truly hysterical, as fear for my family took root and everything I learned went out the window. Throughout this time, the voices from the TV continued calling me names, etc. I couldn't stay any longer in the day room, and the nurses had me on a stretcher right in front of the main desk, where the charge nurse could see me. It felt like a really bad dream, and I was hysterical and paranoid. I laid down on the stretcher, and that's when I noticed hanging overhead the ward number 66. I was also on the 6th floor of the hospital. I wondered if that was why there was so much activity there. Not long after, I started hearing other voices coming from different rooms of the ward asking about me. They seemed to be communicating to each other and laughing. I started silently praying again with more conviction. A male patient in the ward nearest my stretcher started crying out for help, claiming that I was hurting him. I prayed even harder, citing the Lord's Prayer. He asked the nurse for the name of the lady outside hurting him, and she gave him my first name. He started crying again, joined by another voice 2 doors down. I prayed to know who they were in Jesus' name, and all these voices talked at once, but the one name that I could clearly make out was Beelzebub. I continued to pray throughout the first night as they taunted, laughed, cackled, and cried. At this point, the light in the man's hospital room was turned on as a nurse was with him trying to calm him down. I had been sitting up on my stretcher bed whilst praying, and watched his silhouette as he tried to inch his way to the open doorway. It was then that I noticed the odd shadow that he cast. It was so strange. It looked like a spiky-headed being with a dog. Spiky-headed in an almost cartoonish way like Bart Simpson. It continued until morning, and I was moved to a small private room awaiting the doctor. The voices were still verbally attacking and threatening me, but my hysteria was long gone by that point, and I was just determined to leave. I ended up discharging myself before the doctor arrived, but had to return as I still had the IV catheter in my arm. On my return, they placed me in another ward. I refused to go back to Ward 66, and I was allowed to recover in peace. And eventually, the mnemonic taunting stopped. I had a course of bad luck following that event. Basically, all of 2019 was a series of misfortunes and bad luck that still hasn't come right. I don't know what to do other than just keep moving on. I went to a psychiatrist last December who said that other than the trauma I would need their help with, I was in good mental health. My fiancé first encountered this thing in 2013. He and his friends were on a camping trip up in the woods in Maine. Middle of nowhere, literally. No houses, nothing for miles. They had a small fire going, but due to the rain it was hard to keep it going. They kept hearing something trying to creep up on them. It was kind of noisy and sounded big, but was only on 2 feet. They started throwing rocks in the direction where they heard the footsteps coming from, and suddenly this thing let out a blood-curdling scream. Nothing any of them had ever heard before. He describes it as something that sounds like a fox, but slightly more human. It went crashing through the woods super clumsily, but kept trying to come back. They had to fend it off for most of the night. The second encounter was about 1.5 years later. He was out on a solo camping trip in Vermont since that was something that he enjoyed. He heard the exact same blood-curdling scream that he had heard the first time. He was just sitting alone in the dark, looking at the stars with no fire or anything, when suddenly he heard the scream again. He quickly packed everything up and just went home. No hesitation. The third time was tonight. He was supposed to go out to my car to grab us a couple bottles of water when he heard the voices. Due to us recently having someone coming onto our property and stealing from our landlords, he went to investigate. He calls me and tells me to let the dog out. As he was sneaking around, the voices turned into a snarling sound. He quickly stopped, turning off his flashlight, and dropped to the ground. The dog was standing next to him. Suddenly he sees two glowing eyes, and it lunges at him. The dog gets excited and starts chasing it. The whole time they're chasing it, it's screaming and running faster than our dog. Even though he was running with a flashlight, he couldn't make out a shape of its body. He says by how far apart the eyes were, it seemed kind of big. He couldn't get a shape or color, besides where its body should be was a slight discoloration of the darkness around it. It kept looking back at him while he chased, and its eyes were just glowing while it screamed. Our dog chased it off into the woods, but luckily she came back. I think it was trying to lure him in by making it sound like voices, but the dog scared it. He said he couldn't get a height because the eye level kept changing from squatting to standing up, and then it started running. Has anyone experienced anything like this? Or knows what this animal or supernatural thing could be? At my dad's house, I had this red-headed porcelain Victorian type of china doll with a green velvet dress. I was there for a couple of weeks, as opposed to a couple of days, which was usually the case, because I was like 11, so I had no job, and it was summer. This doll was always on the far end of my dresser, facing away from my bed. My room was set up with my headboard against the wall with the window, and the dresser was really long and ran along the same window wall. I honestly never really liked the doll. It always felt like it was angry. I don't even remember when I got it. I want to say it was from my stepmom's mom, or maybe from a garage sale. Both are likely since my stepmom's mom is Dutch and has a huge collection of weird baby dolls. None of them China though. But my stepmom also is a huge lover of all things garage sale. Like I said, I was there for a few days, this time a couple weeks. It didn't really bother me. The only thing that freaked me the hell out was a Furby that spoke without batteries. But then, all the weird stuff started. I've always slept with my door shut, and if there's an option, locked. I used to have nightmares about witches coming into my room, casting a spell on me, then leaving without me ever knowing. So if I didn't have the option of a lock, I would put something behind the door so that I would know if it was opened as I slept. Unfortunately, I did have a lock on my door, but I wasn't allowed to use it, so I always just put a couple socks behind the door. One morning I woke up, and the doll was turned toward me instead of away. I thought nothing of it, figuring that I had probably just bumped it, especially since the socks weren't moved. Again the next morning, it was a couple inches closer to my bed. I have always been a believer in the supernatural, so I was trying really hard not to get scared, especially since I'd had this doll for a while, and it had never done anything sketchy. The next morning, it was almost falling off the edge of the dresser, it was so close to me. I checked the socks. They hadn't been moved, so no one had come into my room. I threw her into a pile of clothes face down in my closet. The next morning, I checked the socks. Again, they hadn't moved, but when I checked the doll, she was facing up. Needless to say, it creeped me right the hell out. So, being the lovely older sister that I was, I gave it to my little sister, who would have been about 4 at the time. The next day, she brought it back to me saying, "I don't like it, it's angry," or something along those lines. I sat with this doll on my bed for a while thinking, what do I do? I've got this doll that probably wants to murder me, but I can't throw it out because it's good quality and my parents are huge skeptics, and I finally decided that if it's angry, maybe it was because nobody was nice to it. So, I took a Barbie brush and started brushing out all of her knots and frizz and tried to get some of the ringlets back to her hair. I cleaned the dirt off of her face, I straightened her dress, all that. I put her on my dresser afterward, and for 6 years nothing happened until, on one of the weekends when I was at my dad's, my sister asked if she could have it because it was pretty, quote-unquote. I guess she forgot the one time she did have it. I got a call a few days later from my dad, letting me know that my sister had thrown my doll out of her second-floor window and broke it. The next time I was there, I asked her why, and she told me that every time she woke up, that the doll was somewhere different from where it was when she had gone to bed. I get sleep paralysis, and it's always the same thing. A pair of young twins would appear. One was in a little dress and pigtails, the other with suspenders and slacks. They never talked, let alone gave me their names, so I called them Tammy and Tucker. They had black skin. Not like African American skin, but black as the night, barely more than a living shadow, with yellow eyes that flickered. The way that they moved was just freaky. They changed positions with my every blink, like a weeping angel, or SCP-173. For the first hour, or 5 blinks after I woke up, there was nothing but the darkness of my room. Then my vision would get slightly lighter, like I had an invisible nightlight that just lit up my whole room. On the next blink, my closet door would open, with a little clawed hand peeping out like it had been in the middle of clawing its way out of the dark depths of my closet. On the next, a hand would appear on the floor under my bed, and the one in my closet would be a full arm. My bed had about a foot of space under it, so I imagine a small child would have no trouble fitting underneath. On the next blink, the hand under my bed would be flipped, frozen in time in the middle of clawing at my bedsheets, and I would see Tammy's head poking out of my closet, staring at me. On the next blink, I would see Tucker's head poking out of the underside of my bed, and Tammy would have moved onto the ceiling, on all fours, her head broken around, just to stare at me. And then, on the next blink, Tucker's head would be upright, his chin resting on my bed, staring at me with his flickering eyes, and Tammy would be closer. On the next, Tucker would be at the foot of my bed, on his knees, staring at me, and I would be able to feel his weight. Tammy would be in the middle of my room. On the next, Tucker would be sitting on my thighs, and Tammy would be at my bedside. And on the final blink, I would see their mouths open almost as wide as their heads, revealing rows upon rows of pearly white teeth, curved like daggers, ready to sink into my flesh, so close to me that I could feel their breath, cold as ice, on my face. Then, with the last blink, they would be gone. No traces of them left, except for the bruises that appeared on my legs the following morning. One of the many reasons I would have trouble falling asleep is that once the paralysis started, my eyes wouldn't allow me to surpass the amount of time that the twins wanted me for, and I couldn't just rapidly blink for them to go away. It was as though my eyes were being held open against my will. Once the paralysis wore off, about 4 blinks after the twins left, I wouldn't be able to make a sound until I drifted off to sleep. When I was like 13, my mom and her boyfriend had to go to the hospital, and no one would be able to get my brother to the bus stop the next morning because they had to stay overnight. So I got to miss school the next day to take my brother. After I made sure my brother got on the bus, I went home and cleaned and did random stuff, like a 13-year-old would do. It was around 11:45 when there was a knock on my door. Thinking it was the mailman or a neighbor or something, I opened the door and said hello. There was this kid. He couldn't have been much older than me at the time, but he had bangs that were covering his eyes, which I found weird because it was like 107 degrees out. So this kid was super still. Like, I thought that one of my friends put a mannequin there and ran away or something. But then it spoke. It sounded like a robot or something. It was like it was programmed to say this. My mother said to ask someone for a phone in fear that I get lost. Do you have a phone? At this point, I was crapping my pants because 1, I'm a 13-year-old girl, and this older boy was dressed like a burglar and at my door with half his face covered. 2, for some reason, I just couldn't look away. I felt like if I moved or said anything other than yes, that I would explode. And 3, I saw 2 other boys around the same age standing in my driveway dressed exactly the same way as the one in front of me. Baggy jeans, dark hoodie, and scruffed up Vans. I began to stutter and shake my head. It was the only thing I could do. I finally got out a no and then started to close my door, but he put his foot in the way. Then the 2 others started walking up, and I was going, hell no. I grabbed the bat by the door and threatened him. If you don't leave right now, I'll kick your ass and then call the cops. I shouted loud enough so that at least one of my neighbors could hear, I hoped. Now, I was this short girl with SpongeBob pajama pants on. I was in no way intimidating. Then he moved his foot and stepped back into the middle of the other 2 perfectly. Then the far right one said in the exact same tone of voice as the first, I'm sorry to bother you. I'll just come again later and ask. Internally, I was planning my funeral. Just as I was about to close the door, the first one smiled and looked up. And that was when I saw that they had black eyes. Then the other 2 looked up, and they were the same. I was like, nope, and slammed the door shut, then called my neighbor, who was this big-ass 20-something-year-old dude. He ran over and looked for them all around my house, but he said they were gone. When I told my mom all of this, she didn't believe me and said I was lying. Said me, the girl with absolutely no social life, who was afraid of her own shadow, was lying. I'm a sheriff's deputy in a fairly busy county. Along with this job comes the unfortunate familiarity with what a decomposing human body smells like. To me, it's very similar to an animal carcass, but with a much sweeter odor. Not sweet in the sense that I enjoy it. Hell no. That smell normally means a bad night for me and another gruesome memory to add to my catalog of things that I would rather forget. With that out of the way, I'll get to what happened. Last night I was patrolling a geographically isolated area of the county which is very large and sparsely populated. Having completed the hour-long trek to the northwestern county line, I began driving through the mountains back toward civilization. About 25 miles from town, or the closest semblance thereof, I hit a straight stretch of highway through a wide valley. Since the weather was nice, I had my windows rolled down. As I passed the entrance of an old logging road, that familiar smell of sweet rot suddenly filled my car. Not just a whiff. A cloud of it filled the cab as if there was a week-old human corpse sitting in the front seat next to me. It was all too familiar, but this time, there was something else that I couldn't quite place. It lingered for a few moments, then went out just as quickly as it had entered. Realizing what I had just smelled, my heart sank, and I pulled to the side of the road. I told myself that it was just a dead animal in the ditch, and that my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned my car around and drove slowly back toward the logging road. The closer I got to it, the smell became stronger, and I grew more certain that I was indeed about to find a body. Holding on to a shred of hope that I was wrong, I parked my unit on the side of the highway just before the dirt road. I radioed to dispatch, told them my location, and that I would be out of my unit for a moment. I didn't say why, to avoid an awkward disregard on a possible body on the side of the road. I shined my flashlight into the ditch, and into the encroaching briars and weeds as I walked closer to where I believed the source of the smell was. Once I was a few yards away from the dirt road, I saw the opening of a concrete culvert going under the highway. At this point, the smell was nearly as strong as it was when I had first passed. The opening of the culvert was about 3 feet in diameter, just large enough to hide a body inside. I cursed and held my breath as I leaned over and shined my light in there. It was just an empty tunnel stretching the width of the highway. Somewhat relieved, I stood and looked around. It smelled as if I was standing on top of whatever was emitting the odor. I searched around the brush for a moment, but found nothing. Thinking the origin might be on the opposite side of the highway, I crossed to the other ditch to continue searching. As I walked away from the other side of the road, the smell grew faint. I stopped at the opposite end of the culvert and peeked inside just to double check. The odor was nearly gone at this point. I stood up and checked my surroundings when I heard a crack in the bush behind me, and the smell engulfed me and was even stronger than before. Thinking for a moment that the wind must have shifted, I froze when I realized that the air was dead still. Whether it was fear or something else, a shiver went down my spine. In the distance, I saw headlights coming down the highway. As the car came near, the odor seemed to move away further into the bushes toward where I had heard the crack. The car stopped, and the passenger rolled down the window and asked if I was all right. I lied and told him that I was. I thanked him for checking and walked briskly back to my car as they drove away. Then I got the heck away from there. Once I was able to get cell service, I called my friend who was patrolling the opposite side of the county. I explained what had happened, trying not to let on that I was spooked. Once I was done, he paused for a moment, then asked about the unusual hint of something which accompanied the smell. He asked if it was sulfur, and I put 2 and 2 together. It was sulfur that I had smelled. I asked if he thought that I had found a demon in the middle of nowhere, to which he simply responded with a concerned yes. A little background on this guy. He is the son of a missionary and has been around the world. He has seen, rather smelled this before, and told me that it was a very concerning experience. This spooked me even more because his responses were very out of character for him. There's always the chance of a very scientific explanation, and I hope that one is out there. So I've been watching Bad Mood Rude, and she posted the sellers where she gets her haunted dolls from. I decided to get one for myself, and her name is Sandy. Some info about Sandy. Her husband was in the mob. She had alcohol and drug issues. She's nice and loves music. She also has PTSD. I've had Sandy for 3 days now, and I've already had some experiences with her. My first experience was her giving me one of her PTSD episodes. I think she was trying to show me how it feels for her. But how it started was my left arm got cold, and then it started getting pins and needles. My heart started racing, so I sat up in bed and started taking deep breaths, and I said to Sandy, "Wow, Sandy, that's intense, you're really strong." As in, her energy is really powerful, and from my right side, I heard a faint, echoey voice say, "Oh, I'm sorry." And eventually it stopped, and I heard her crying, because I think she was scared. I told her that she was okay, and to come and sit in bed with me, and crying stopped. To add, Sandy used to have fights with her husband a lot, and when this happened, my roommates, they're a couple, were having a fight. I heard them going back and forth through the vent. On the second day, I was in bed with my boyfriend beside me watching TikTok. I hear outside our door what sounds like heels walking on some sort of hard flooring. Note, we don't have anyone in the house who wears heels, and we have like plastic thin flooring. Hopefully someone knows what I mean. It went on for a bit, then no walking, and it starts again. I tell my boyfriend, "Hey babe, do you hear that sound?" Ironically, our other roommate in the room beside us walks out to go to the washroom at the same time as I heard the heels tapping, so my boyfriend thought I was just crazy and said that it was our roommate, even though he's a dude and very much doesn't wear heels. Today I did a spirit box, and Sandy came through giving me clear answers and in full sentences, and she likes living with me apparently, so I'm happy with that. Sandy is really great, and I love having her here. She always seems to show me her presence, but not my boyfriend, who's a huge non-believer in ghosts. And I really think she likes me because I want to help her with her PTSD, and instead of freaking out about the PTSD episode, I handled it and tried my best to get her to calm down. Every time I get up, I feel her following me, and it's like she's watching over me, protective basically. She had kids while she was alive. I really love having her in my home, and she's not scary at all. I know a lot of people are going to say negative stuff on this post, like, why would you invite a spirit into your home on purpose, and, oh, all spirits are negative. And to that I say, well, I like the paranormal, and Sandy is not negative. If she was, I would feel it. I would feel fear when she shows her presence, and she would be trying to hurt me. But she doesn't want to hurt me. Very clearly, she just wants to be understood and be known that she is there. She's honestly so sweet and motherly. She's just got some issues like any living person does, because she was living once too. I'm not a superstitious person, and I know that not all spirits are bad, and this is a PSA for everyone. Not all spirits are bad, but a lot of people like to assume that they are, and I don't like that at all. People like to only notice the bad ones and ignore the good spirits. Personally, I look at all spirits as good, but sometimes troubled. My friends and I used to camp a lot in the El Dorado National Forest. We had a spot along Sopiago Springs we used to camp at a lot. One weekend, we decided to go for a 3-day foraging trip. We brought in MREs in case we couldn't find anything, some guns, and some supplies to set up shelter, but that's about it. The first night was chill. We cooked a bunch of crawdads and a squirrel my buddy shot, drank a few beers we'd brought, and slept fine. Next day, something felt weird to me. One of my friends who was with me and I had had some really creepy experiences in this part of the forest in the past, and it felt a bit like those. Forest was dead silent, and you felt like something was watching you. I grew up in the woods, so I know the signs of a predator, but this felt different than a bear or a mountain lion. When night fell, my friends went 200 yards or so up the stream to do some stuff, and I was alone at the campsite. The feeling got even stronger, so I built up the fire nice and big and grabbed a gun. I kept hearing faint voices from the woods in the opposite direction from where my friends had went. They were low and distinct sounds, but they were creeping me out majorly, and my buddies had taken the only 2 flashlights. Poor planning in hindsight. As I peered out into the darkness, I caught a glimpse of something moving 50 yards or so out into the trees. I snapped the rifle to my shoulder and got the scope on it. It was pretty dark, and the only light was from the fire, but I could see the outline of what I was aiming at. It looked human, but was on all 4s, and its arms seemed a lot longer than they should have been. It stood a bit like an ape, but very low to the ground. I only saw it for a second before it loped off deeper into the woods. After I lost track of it, I'd hear light rustling in different directions around the camp, leaves scuffling, the occasional twig breaking. Always away from where my friends went, 180 degrees on the other side of the camp from their departure. I got the sense that whatever it was stalking me. I kept the fire high and was staying sharp, looking out into the woods. But I didn't see it again. My buddies came back about 10 minutes later to find me a paranoid wreck glancing at the tree line with the scope. I told them what happened and they got quiet. Then told me the reason they came back when they did was they started hearing the same shit that I was hearing by where they were, and it had spooked them. We spent the second night of our trip with a big-ass fire and 3 lookouts. Nobody slept that night. In the morning, we broke camp as quick as we could and hightailed it out of there. We never camped in that spot again. This story takes place during the late summer in the 1960s in Iowa in a very small farming community. My friend's great-grandpa, Bob, owned a farm out there. He had acres of corn, wheat, potatoes, etc., but corn was his main crop, so he had a huge cornfield. It was around 2 a.m., and his grandfather couldn't sleep, so he went outside to get some fresh air. While outside, he noticed something that looked like a child walking around in the cornfield. So Bob ran back inside and grabbed his double-barrel shotgun and woke the farmhand for backup. They combed through the cornfield in an attempt to find whatever was running around out there. After a while, they still couldn't find anything, so Bob told the farmhand to go back inside the house while he stayed on the porch to watch his cornfield. Then, as he looks at the gravel road between his yard and the fence line that led to the cornfield, standing on the road was a little girl around 6 years old or so, and she was wearing a white dress that made her look like she had just gotten out of church. Bob thought that his mind must have been playing tricks on him, so he tried to lay down on the couch to rest, but also stay somewhat alert. However, not even a minute after he laid down, he heard a knock on the screen door. He walked up to the door and slightly cracked the main door open. He saw the little girl and asked, "May I help you?" The little girl said, "Mister, I'm lost, and I don't know where my parents are. Can I come in the house and use your telephone?" Bob felt uneasy and told her that he could get her a glass of water and that he can call her parents for her if she gave him the number, but he didn't feel comfortable allowing her in his home. He felt something off about the little girl. However, the little girl insisted to be the one to call and talk to them. And Bob said, "Young lady, it's 2 in the morning, and I don't feel right letting a stranger into the house, little girl or not." The little girl started to get agitated and said, "I'm not leaving until you let me in to use your phone." Startled, Bob told the little girl that he was going to call the police to come pick her up so that they could keep her safe and find her parents. He closed the door to go and call the police, and he heard someone punch the door like a grown man. He walked back and cracked the door open again, but when he looked, he realized that it was still the little girl, and that she was the one who had punched the door. But when he looked at her this time, she didn't have any eyes. Instead, she had pitch black orbs instead of eyes, and she said in a deep voice, "Let me in." Bob grabbed his shotgun and pointed it at the little girl and told her no and to go away. After this, the little girl looked right into the barrel and then back up at Bob, smiled smugly at him, and giggled before she ran back into the cornfield and disappeared. I'll just start with some history on the doll. Was told this by the previous owner. She was bought in Monroe, Connecticut, about 30-ish minutes away from the Warrens Occult Museum at a second-hand store. The owner who bought it felt like something was wrong with it and would often wake up with scratches and have nightmares every night. So she gave it to a friend to sell it on eBay, the man I purchased it from. The man selling it had a few stories, like one, for instance, where he had family coming over, so he hides the doll in an upstairs closet so his niece doesn't see it. The family slept downstairs, and the niece woke up at 3 a.m. crying from a nightmare, and she described the doll he had upstairs. But she never went upstairs and had never seen the doll in person, didn't even know it was there. After that experience, he wanted to sell the doll and didn't feel safe with it, so he put it in a storage unit. The company he was using called him, asking for him to come and open the unit for them to prove that there was no animal or person in there, as the security guard had heard banging and movement in the storage locker at night. I am very interested in the paranormal, so I have a collection of Ouija boards, a haunted music box, and an exorcism kit from the 70s. So I decided to purchase this doll. When it first arrived, I took it out of the box, and all 4 of my dogs started growling very, very aggressively and moving backward away from the doll. To clarify, my dogs love everyone. If a stranger broke into my house to rob us, they would greet him with wagging tails and licks. This behavior was very odd for them. As I said earlier, I have an exorcism kit, and with this kit there's a cross that is almost locked in place with 2 pieces of metal. And around 30 minutes after removing the doll from the box, I heard a noise from upstairs. I went up to investigate, and it was the cross. The cross had been removed from the kit and had fallen off of my shelf and onto the floor. I was the only one home, and all the dogs were downstairs with me, and my room door was closed. Ever since this experience, my family has been scared of the doll, so I put the doll back into the box and sealed it with salt and put it in the garage of my old house. I moved out with my girlfriend, and my family still lives there. I unfortunately forgot about it as I was packing in a hurry. I forgot to get stuff in the garage. After I moved, my mother moved into her now ex-boyfriend's house, and she put the doll in a shed. Not every night, but a lot of times throughout the week, they would look outside late at night, and the door to the shed would be open. One time when Logan went outside to close the door, he heard something move in the shed, so he went inside to check out what the noise was. When he was inside, he couldn't find anything that could have possibly made the noise, but he said he felt uncomfortable and cold, so he quickly went to leave, and just as he did, 4 truck tires that were sitting on a shelf fell right on top of where he had just been standing. Yes, this could have been a coincidence, but it felt like it wasn't, especially since the doll was also sitting on that shelf. After my mother broke up with Logan, she moved into an apartment and she put the doll in a closet. She's told me that nothing has really happened since, but when she's alone, she hears footsteps and knocks. The last few nights she's been waking up around 3 a.m. hearing noises in her room, but can never see or find anything. I'll be visiting her in January, and will be bringing the doll back home with me when I leave. I work on oil rigs. I have ever since I was 20, and I'm 33 now. In 2007, I was working for Nomac Drilling. They have since sold out to Patterson, and we were drilling in the Haynesville for natural gas. Anyone who works on rigs knows that the work can take you way off the beaten path from what normal civilization is used to. Some places, you're on ranch roads for an hour before you reach the location, and others you're driving on roads canopied by trees in the backwoods of Louisiana. This happened to me in the latter. We were rigging down after finishing a well, and we were on our last night of the 7-day hitch. About halfway through our 12-hour tower. We had pretty much finished, and were making sure everything was tied down securely for the rig move. We killed the light plants, and the driller let us knock off early. This area was accessible outside Houghton, Louisiana, and the lease was actually on the back of the Barksdale AF base, but we had to leave the way we came in. Driving home at 2 a.m. seemed pretty normal at first, and I made it to the blacktop with no issues. The blacktop was still canopied by trees, and other than the lights from my truck, everything was pitch black. Out of nowhere, still basically in the middle of nowhere, this thing appears almost close enough to get hit on my driver's side. Okay, weird. But even more strange, he was leaning at what I swear was an impossible angle for someone to not tip over. Its hands were stretched, reaching towards my truck, and what I could see of the face was morbid and twisted. The hairs on the back of my neck raised, and I gasped it to speed back closer to society. It was about a 2-hour drive home, and I felt off for the rest of the trip. More oddly, I was working over on a separate occasion with one of the crews that work when I'm home, and another hand was talking about a very similar, if not identical, experience. I don't know who or what I saw, and the face could have been a blur from relative distance, speed, and the time I actually saw them. But who is out that late, and why? If someone was broken down, I could see them trying to flag me. But this didn't seem to be the case here. I live in a small town, and things like rumors tend to spread pretty quickly since folks around here are incredibly nosy beings. The most trusted source of these rumors is the local bar located in the center of the small settlement that we live in, which my father visits frequently. It is right by the school that I go to. Anyway, 2 weeks before all this bullcrap started, he came back with quite the story. It is said that something off has been going on with our town's graveyard, which is right by these creepy old woods a little bit away from the town itself. Usually takes 20 minutes to get there by car. Apparently, drunkards there claim that there's a medium disguised as a homeless man hanging around the woods surrounding the graveyard, and that sometimes he can even be found by the graves eating bread. At first, I didn't believe it, so me and my friend decided to walk to the graveyard and hang around there trying to find that guy. So we did, and the graveyard was full of people for a few hours, but the normal kind of people. A few more hours passed, and soon there was no one left except for an old, bearded man on the bench by the football field across the woods in the parking lot. He was looking at empty plastic bags with a box of cigarettes resting beside him. Nothing suspicious. My friend had the guts to walk up to him and insult him. I walked away from her, but when she crossed the line, I pulled her away, telling her that he may be a serial killer or a crazy drug addict. But he remained quiet until she yanked her hand away from mine, grabbed his box of cigarettes, and crushed it under her feet. She also threatened to hurt him if he didn't speak, and that's when he stood up and looked her dead in the eyes, and he was much taller than her too. He told her something along the lines of, "You are a disgrace in the eyes of God," and walked away onto the road until we lost track of him. I started to worry, and told her that maybe he was a priest or a monk, and now was going to tell everyone in our town how she had mocked him, and I was actually afraid. She reassured me that he was none of these things, because he had cigarettes with him, but I think those weren't even his. That night I slept over at her house because I was scared to go back to mine alone. I woke up in the middle of the night, and since I was sleeping in the same bed with her, I had a clear view of the pitch-black shadow of a man standing over her right beside her bed, his palm on her wrist. I raised my body, getting ready to stand up, but he turned his head to me and started to shake it from left to right. So I figured it was a lucid dream and rolled over to the other side, drifting back to sleep. The next morning, she looked pale and ghostly, and I asked her if she got enough rest. She informed me that she did not even sleep, and kept having problems with her breathing and her heartbeat. I was so scared that I almost pissed myself right there and then, and as of now, I am home alone and feeling like I am being watched. I was going to my sister's graduation in Binghamton University, and my family rented out a quote-unquote well-priced Airbnb for 2 nights. The only one that had 5 bedrooms, because extended Chinese family. It was a Victorian-era house, completely decked out with Victorian-American aesthetics. It had trinkets, paintings of serious children, photos of even more serious people. It had ornate floral wallpaper, and dolls. Many dolls. We were picking out bedrooms, and no one in my family wanted the room with the creepy dolls. I'm not superstitious, and I didn't see the room, and I didn't understand the gravity of the situation, so I was like, sure, I'll take the room with the dolls. You see where this is going. As midnight approached, I got tired, even after being energized by a tiny bite of baklava and an espresso, so I was the first to go to bed. I went into the room and saw the dolls. They were locked inside a glass case, all facing the bed. I was like, okay, don't be silly. Also, you're a brave trans girl, and they're probably more afraid of you than you are of them, because you're something they've likely never encountered before. Silly thoughts. I decided to take out my pocket knife and sleep with it at the nightstand so that I would have some protection. I watched YouTube for a while and turned off the lamp and went under the covers. I felt the dolls staring, but my rational side told me it's all in my head. By 3 a.m., I was half conscious. I was slipping in and out of pure unconsciousness. While I was in a dreamlike state, I was aware of everything going on around me. The dolls just kept staring. Were they next to me? I was afraid to open my eyes. I blinked and I thought, it's okay, I have protection. I didn't dare look at the knife on the nightstand. I was afraid that I would see a doll next to me. Then I remembered, statistically, armed victims of assault tend to have their weapons taken away and used against them, and I thought, oh my god, I am going to be stabbed to death. Then I heard vividly, in a playful, childlike voice, it would be my heart's desire. I immediately became alert. It was like R2-D2 rebooting after being in low power mode. Adrenaline rushed through me. I heard a ringing in my ear as my awareness went from 0 to 60 in a split second. I stayed like that until the sun started to rise at around 5 a.m. That was when I fell back asleep. When I woke up, I dreaded having to sleep there again for yet another night. That night I thought, you know what? Violence begets violence. So I slept with my pocket knife in my bag instead. I fell asleep and slept peacefully through the night. I used to live on a large property with a lake, 29 acres of land and heavily forested. I was playing. I was about 11 or 12 at the time, outside by myself, right after the sun had set. I believe this was in the fall, so there were barely any lights to see outside, maybe except for a light on the house about 50 feet away from the swing set that I was on. Behind the swing set were really tall trees. Not many new or sapling trees were anywhere near. I know specifically that there were no trees short enough to have some owl or animal sit in them, because all the trees, pine trees, were mature and taller than my 2-story house. My mom came out to tell me that dinner was almost ready. When she did this, she turned on the outside light on the back porch, illuminating the area so I could see. I was still on the swing set at the time. I start to get up and I turn around, I think to find my flip-flops, when I see 2 bright eyes reflecting the light of the outside light, looking at me from about 20 feet away. The eyes were well above any average human size, about 7.5 feet off of the ground, and they were large. I stopped, stunned and really scared. I was familiar with the woods right behind the swing set, and I knew something unnatural was looking at me. I couldn't see the body, but the eyes looked at me and I tried to get an understanding. And I thought of something massive and humanoid. Bigfoot. Remind you that no animal could have levitated on that spot longer than 5 seconds. Even then, there were no perches or anything there to suspect critters. So to end my experience, I ran inside, locked all the doors, and couldn't think straight for the next couple of days. Let's just say I never played outside on that swing set after sunset ever again. I still think about this, and it chills me. This paranormal encounter took place at the hotel I worked at last year. I was 20 years old, working at a small mom-and-pop hotel in Ontario, California. I had worked there for some time before I started to stay there for a few months. The owner taught me everything that I needed to know so that I can run his business while he went on a business trip to Africa. Mind you, I didn't have a car, so my only option was to stay there and work around the clock if need be. I didn't have to pay for the room, and I got to wash my clothes in the laundry room. There was a grocery store in walking distance, and restaurants all around me where I could get food at a discounted price since I worked at the hotel. I thought this was a sweet deal. One night, my boyfriend came down to visit, and while he was in the bathroom, I heard banging coming from the room next to ours. Then, I heard scratching on my walls. I told him to stop playing, and he didn't even know what I was talking about. The banging continued all night, so I called the front desk and told them that the people next to me were loud and that I had to be up at 6 to go down there to work. She was quiet for a moment, and then she told me that she hadn't rented out the room next to mine. Mind you, I had an end room. I quickly ran outside to see if the curtains were open or closed, and they were open. I could see right into that room, and no one was there. I had never been so creeped out in all my life. I decided to sage the room to get rid of any bad spirits or energy, and that worked for a while, until it didn't. The next time, something demonic happened. I was asleep and kept hearing whispers in my sleep. I hate whispers with a passion, and they creep me out to the fullest. So I sat up in bed and I was looking around the dark room, and in the corner of the room, I saw white, glowing eyes staring at me. I felt frozen by its glare. I could see its body and saw that it was crouched down, holding its knees. Then I saw more shadows appearing closer and closer. I went to turn on the lamp next to the bed, and it didn't cut on. So my next thought was that I needed to run outside and get to safety. It took all the balls in the world for me to get up and do that. I was so scared that I couldn't even feel my legs. All I could feel was the cold wooden floor beneath me. I got to the door and flung it open, only to see that the bedroom curtains were on the outside of my room's window. The sky was black, and the clouds were a dark green with gray tint. I was mortified to realize that I was still asleep, and that I hadn't actually woken up. I looked back inside the hotel room and saw myself asleep in the bed. I screamed bloody murder, and that's when I jolted awake for real. I said a prayer and went back to sleep. The encounter that followed was even worse. Yet again, I could hear things in my sleep. I was terrified and couldn't move any part of my body. I began to pray in my head as loud as I could, only to wake and feel my body slam on the bed as if I had been levitating. I called my grandma the next day, and she said that it was a demonic attack. I got my car shortly after a few days later, and never stayed in that hotel again. I've always loved the paranormal. Even as a little girl, I found it fascinating. I've had a few encounters in the past, and my house is also haunted. But on to the first paranormal experience that I ever had. I was watching the 1994 version of Little Women with my mom and grandmother in my room when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye on my bookshelf where my dolls were. The air was off, but I could see that one of the doll's dresses was billowing around her, and one of my other dolls was reaching out to her. I brushed it off, as my mind playing tricks. I should mention that my mom rearranged them that day and had them all facing the same direction. Skip to the next day. I had walked out of my room because my grandmother had called me to ask me something, and I walked back in, and all my dolls were turned in different directions and facing different ways. I ran out of my room screaming. My mom didn't believe me until I showed her. She fixed them again. My room had always been off, and I had obtained more dolls from a family friend a few years later, and this is when things really got weird. I have 2 musical dolls, and they would go off randomly sometimes. I started to feel like I was watched, and I wasn't alone. But I just brushed it off as paranoia because I had never experienced anything major other than some of my dolls appearing to move every once in a while. Skip again to college, after years of dealing with minimal doll movement, something changed. I was in my room one night, and I felt something breathe down my neck, and it scared me so much that I didn't sleep in my room that night. My parents divorced when I was 15, and my dad was dating this girl who loved the paranormal and was also a medium. I asked her when she came over to check out and cleanse my room. The moment she stepped in there, she looked at me and asked if there was a doll in my closet. My heart sank because a family friend had given me a porcelain baby doll that was practically life-size, but it had no eyes. That was the one in my closet, and she confirmed that it was the one that she was getting negative vibes from. She prayed over my room, saged it, and I still have the rose quartz in my room that she gave me. I got rid of the majority of my dolls, and I don't feel anything in there anymore. This is just one of many experiences I've had and thought I would share. I still constantly check my bookshelf just to make sure, and it's been almost 2 years since I got rid of my haunted dolls, but I don't think I'll ever forget. I posted this in a UFO subreddit, as I was not sure what a crawler was until after doing a bit of research. There's a possibility that what I saw that night may have been a crawler as much as it could have been an alien. I never saw a UFO, but I saw an entity mostly associated with UFOs. I grew up in the USSR, in now northern Belarus, until I was 13 years old. 37 years ago, my mother and I saw an entity outside looking in at us through the window. It was hairless, pale white, huge, bulging black eyes, and it had teeth that were very small, very well spaced, skinny, and pointed, almost like an anglerfish. We hid for hours until we heard my father return home. We both looked out to see the being stand up from behind a wall. It was much taller than a human. It was hiding back there behind that wall, and I believe that it was waiting for us to come outside. My father drove up the driveway, and we saw the silhouette of its body from the back. It was hunched over, staring at the car. My father saw it in the headlights, and what it looked like, perfectly. He drove at it, and it ran away into the brush around the house. It never made a sound. It seemed smart but cautious, and the overwhelming feeling that I got that night was that it was vicious and violent. My parents spoke with the police, as we were so horrified about the encounter. After speaking to the police or the KGB, we were relocated and forced to never speak of the event to anyone. Within 30 hours, I was living in a new home nearly 100 kilometers away. I have searched for so many years for an explanation. I've spoken to government officials in Belarus. I have had interviews with people who lived near our home then, about 10 years ago. I have no answers. I'm a die-hard agnostic skeptic with an open mind. I believe that anything is possible, but I want a logical and preferably scientific reason behind that anything. The last 10 days, however, have been absolutely insane. It started when I was a little kid. In my memories, I see kids between the ages of 5 and 11 with solid black eyes and smiles too big for their faces. I had a bad childhood, so I just figured they were added memories by an imaginative mind, because that's the answer that solidly fits my skeptical scientific worldview. Last month, I started seeing a girl. She told me about her experiences with sleep paralysis and shadow people. I explained to her that it was a rational experience caused by being in a hypnagogic state. Then she brought up the Cheshire Cat kids. Her recollections matched mine as a child. It was unnerving to say the least, and she and I spent almost an hour discussing the most minute details about them. Our stories matched. So, she does acid with her friends about 10 days ago, and told me that she stepped outside. A group of 6 of them were waiting for her. They showed her scenes from my life that were my darkest. She described them to me too accurately for her to have heard them from a second-hand source, which would be hard to do anyway, considering that I don't like sharing such detailed information. They then told her that I was going to die soon, and that she should stay away from me. This has put a monkey wrench into one of the most promising relationships of my 25 years. Since that night, I have nightmares of them coming into my room, licking my forehead, and showing me the memories of my past as if they were happening in that moment, complete with smells, sounds, sights, etc. I have written this part off as my subconscious mind reacting with my long-dormant PTSD, but they got more and more vivid. While this is happening, she has been distancing herself more and more. Last night was the weirdest part of the tale, however. I was driving down a windy country road to calm myself, and a pair of headlights flies from around a bend and runs me off the road, almost into a tree. When I looked, however, there was no car, and the headlights extinguished after passing me. I'm chalking all of this up to anxiety-started delusions and possible schizophrenia, but I cannot explain how she knew what she did, and why all of this is suddenly happening. I was home alone on Thanksgiving. It was 2015 around evening time, and I heard some knocking. Being in a festive and playful spirit, I opened the door without looking, and automatically felt a deep sense of regret, sort of like a literal, oh shit, moment. I didn't know where it was coming from until I actively started trying to place what was wrong with the situation, and that's when I realized they didn't have any whites in their eyes. For a second I thought, isn't Halloween over? And was confused until the oldest boy made eye contact with me. And that's literally when I felt like I was staring death in the face. They wanted to come in, and the way they spoke made it seem like they knew what I was thinking and were actively mocking my helplessness. I slammed the door on them, turned all my lights on, and started watching TV while they stood outside and would occasionally knock. I felt like I lost a good 6 hours of time because I don't even remember when I fell asleep or what I was last watching. I remember when I first sat down, Gabriel Iglesias was playing, but I don't remember anything. When I woke up, it was around 2 a.m., and the lights were all off, and there was only static on the TV. I have Dish Network, and there were no power outages in my area, and I don't get static if Dish were to go out. I would get a channel listed as an HDMI and a black screen, or it would be the introduction screen where it would show 2 people talking about the features of Dish Network. Also, if the lights went out, they would come back on. I had to literally switch the lights on and off a few times for it to work, but no one was home. After that, I would occasionally see them outside, and every time it would be pin drop silence, and my lights would occasionally go out or something would lose power like my dish. One time my phone that was at 63% dropped to 1% in 5 minutes. After a few months of being afraid of every knock, I decided to call an imam to bless the house. I also saged the house and brought a lot of different surahs, psalms, to put in every room, including the bathrooms. Since then, the visits have stopped. However, a few months after that, I remember hearing a blood-curdling scream and a banging sound on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing. A few months ago, maybe 2 or so, my mom and I heard a banging coming from the front door, and same thing. No one was there. I don't know if it was them, or something coming back, or just kids playing a prank, but I was so terrified. Before the pandemic, I was visiting West Canada, just exploring caves, when I'm pretty deep inside of one, perhaps 70 meters in. I get to this pretty tall section of cavern, and then I hear it, a scuffling noise. I put it off, thinking that it was just some rocks moving. I turn off my headlamp, and then I see them. These two glowing eyes. Glowing yellow eyes. So I turned my lamp on again, and what I saw this time was terrible. There was this grayish thing. It looked humanoid, but its arms and legs were too long and splayed out weirdly. Its claws were long, and they looked like they could easily slice through Kevlar. Its teeth were long as well. Its skin was super tight around its ribs and spine. I could see its bones. It screeched a horrible noise. I had to cover my ears. I look back, and it's gone. But I hear this low growl. Well, I felt it more than I heard it. So I start slowly heading back, and it starts moving toward me, so I start running. Pretty close to the exit, I could see the sunset. I felt its breath on me. As soon as I reached the exit, though, it pulled back. Bystanders said they saw it too, that it ran away like lightning. I'm never going to those caves again. This happened to me 2 years in a row when I was young, too young to face as much horror as I did. I was 6, and it was Halloween. I was just getting into bed when I heard an awful screeching sound coming from the hall closet. It was right by my mom and dad's bedroom, but they didn't hear a thing, which really freaked me out. I slowly got up out of bed and ran silently to the closet. I opened the door, and it took all my effort not to scream. I saw a yellow metal box. I opened it and saw the creepiest doll. It was a raggedy, ugly, old doll. Its hair was in 2 long, blonde braids. Her, I should say. I slowly picked the doll up. It screamed again, and this time I did too. From that night on, the thought of it lurked in my mind until the next Halloween, when I had another encounter with it. When everything happened again that year, I made up my mind and threw it away. The next day, I had gone into the closet to get my hula hoop, and my eye caught the yellow box. I picked it up. I opened it, and an uncomfortable chill ran down my back. The doll had returned. I couldn't get rid of her. Ever. To this day, I still know its exact location. I'm an actor at a haunted attraction in Pennsylvania. I was playing Jason on the hayride scene tonight. I hop up on the hayride and walk up and down the middle of it and scare people. This is my second year doing it, and I absolutely love this gig. But tonight, something happened that I couldn't explain. It was the second to last wagon of the evening. I was in the middle of the wagon, headed toward the front, when I got a really bad gut feeling that something was off. I got chills immediately and tried to hide the feeling of terror I had at that moment from customers. I turned my head, and to my left I saw a girl staring at me. She looked completely normal at first, until she blinked. In what seemed like hours, I saw her blink in slow motion, her eyes going from the sides and meeting at the middle. After the first blink, I saw her eyes turn completely black. She cracked a small smile while staring at me straight through my mask and into my soul. I heard her laugh inside my head. I was frozen for a moment, and she blinked again and she looked normal. My body unfroze, and I tried my best to finish the wagon. This was literally the scariest thing that's ever happened to me in my life. What did I see? My parents live on about 30 acres of wooded land in the middle of nowhere. I was in high school at this time and was up late on a weekend. I remember that I had fallen asleep in the recliner in our living room and woke up at around 2 a.m. I sat up and watched TV for about half an hour and then got up to get some water before going to bed. Our kitchen sink looked out over our backyard, and I could see clear to the tree line because of a lamp on a telephone pole that we had installed for security. As I looked out, I saw something dash across the tree line for about 50 feet before going back into the trees. I can still see it in my mind. It was either a white or really pale gray, and looked like a person moving on all fours. There was no visible fur or clothing. I could tell it was large, at least the size of a person, maybe larger. It covered the 50-foot span in between 5 and 10 seconds. I was absolutely frozen in place for a solid minute after this encounter. My parents kept telling me that it was just an albino coyote. I know it wasn't. A few years later, I came across a YouTube video talking about really strange creatures caught on trail cameras. It was one of those low-quality edits that pop up on your recommended videos after a long video binge. Halfway through came an image that made my blood go cold. It was called a rake. This was exactly what I had seen. To this day, I will swear by it that I saw this creature, and still refuse to be outside at night at my parents' house. So last year, I received a doll from my aunt. It was a hand-me-down that she found in storage, so I don't know its origin story. Her name is Alice. First weird note is that I immediately knew her name as soon as I held her for the first time. Anyways, originally Alice sat in my room, but one day while cleaning, I put her in my closet. After putting her in my closet, weird stuff started happening. I would hear her in there. Usually her knocking against the walls. It was so loud